What's going on, folks? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to talk to y'all about Tupac Resurrection, which was Tupac's posthumous album from late 2003. This was also a movie documentary that came out, but Afeni Shakur, his mother, and Eminem kind of executive produced this Tupac Resurrection soundtrack, which has some new joints on there and a combination of records that he did throughout his lifetime. A lot of these are stuff that he did when he was alive. I also like the aspect behind it because you got some new Eminem productions, and even one of 50 Cent's producers, Red Spider, drops a beat on here. So 50 Cent and Eminem are on here. You get the Outlaws on at least one new song, and Eminem drops a verse. So it's interesting just in the sense, just because I liked Loyal to the Game that Eminem really helped executive produce, and this is kind of like the precursor to that. So the sheer amount of Tupac Eminem collaborations unfortunately never happened, but Eminem's rendition of what he felt from Tupac was particularly strong just because it resulted in some pretty stark and dark productions from Eminem. That's usually some of the best that he's done. I mean, there's just not many folks apart from his Shady Records camp that Eminem really produced for. And it's just interesting hearing, because I feel like a lot of these songs that Eminem produced for Tupac would be good for just about any other rapper around that time in 2003 and 2005. It definitely would have worked outstandingly. Some of these could have really given some rapper out there some really kind of creepy vibes, and it just kind of gives Tupac like an extra sense. It makes him feel a lot more relevant considering that he passed on in 1996, and it gives him a 2000s feel that kind of gives him a minor edge as if he were around in that time even though he wasn't. So it's kind of like it feels like Tupac was around back in 2003 and 2004 despite the fact that that's not the case. But it's interesting, and I definitely like the dark vibes from that Eminem was producing, and it makes me wish that Eminem would still produce songs like this like he did back in those days, because Eminem was 30 at the time, 30, 31 and such, and he was definitely in the middle of his own prime, right between Eminem Show and Encore and the D12 projects and that type of stuff. And 50 Cent, I wish I could say the same thing. I mean, 50 Cent had the right attempt on here. I'm definitely glad that he was on here, but I felt like it seemed like he did better on Loyal to the Game. For some reason, I did not like Red Spider's beat. It was just a little bit too thumping, way too thumping, and it didn't quite feel correct for how Tupac kind of was. I mean, I think it probably would have been a lot more interesting to have heard Tupac on an up-tempo vibe like that had the production just not quite been as, I mean, it just seemed like that was more of like a burly kind of song than I would have expected for Tupac. It was just a little bit too exhibit sounding and Busta Rhymes like and that type of stuff. But basically, the two singles on this project were Runnin', Dying to Live, and One Day at a Time, Eminem's version. So, Dying to Live, Runnin', Dying to Live has Biggie on there. I didn't realize this, but Tupac and Biggie actually did record songs together in their lifetime. Most of these happened in like 93 and 94, but because when Tupac got shot in late 1994 and he thought Biggie did it, that kind of sabotaged them ever doing any other collaborations. But they did like maybe a small handful of tracks in this song, even though this production was not the one that was used. This was something that Biggie and Tupac, the actual verses that they attempted, were for it. Now, the kind of situation, it has a really kind of dramatic, I mean, the sample on this song is pretty dramatic. I remember hearing it on MTV back in the day. I thought that it was like some political figure that died, just the essence of how they put that song together. It really feels like a statement more so than just like a standard rap song. It was just very dark and dramatic and that type stuff. But the production on there, I want to keep using the word dramatic, but it's just very stark and emphasized and brooding in a lot of ways, and both Tupac and Biggie do great jobs on there. It's very brief, but I feel like this beat is pretty well put together and is an easy win for that sort of single. I just wonder how Tupac and Biggie would have torn it up had they actually did this beat as opposed to just having posthumous verses. But then One Day at a Time, Eminem's version, which has Tupac, Eminem, and the Outlaws. That's definitely a good concoction. I like the Outlaws being on there. Eminem, he nailed that verse pretty well, and then Tupac sounded really well on it. I mean, Tupac gave off this really, the thing that Eminem and Tupac's kind of vibes together they have is the songs like Ghost and One Day at a Time and Dying to Live. All of these have like a very shrill kind of death around the corner type vibe. I mean, Tupac talked about death, but he didn't do it all the time. But the way that Eminem emphasizes on it, all of these songs have a very paranoid and kind of shrill and just kind of like eyes bugging kind of vibe to them. I definitely feel like Ghost is very manic. One Day at a Time is him talking about demons that he wants to leave and is not happy with. And I feel like Running Dying to Live predicts like his own death and was very prophetic. So all of these have to do, all three of the Eminem produced songs with Tupac have to do with the concept of either something bad happening, death, or just like an overall shrill concept of saying things are not in a very good sort right now. And it works. I mean, I like this particular style from Tupac, but then it's also kind of, I mean, I don't want to say it like paints him in a corner, but that's kind of the theme of like this project, is just kind of saying it's just a very kind of him on like his Me Against the World vibes more so than All Eyes on Me. On the album All Eyes on Me, Tupac was having kind of more of a good time with songs like California Love, the kind of getting you back vibes of Picture Me Rolling. That was a real kind of sarcastic, like fuck you right back kind of song. I felt like All Eyes on Me was a great song with Big Psych. I mean, there's just tons of songs like that. I Ain't Mad at Ya. I mean, some of those type vibes, but this is Tupac that's really kind of bothered and paranoid. And that kind of happens to be the concept about it, but it works. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Tupac did this, and this was a style towards him, the kind of more in the cemetery Tupac, kind of more introspective and kind of, in a way, kind of endangered in a sense. But the theme of it is it doesn't get enough room to really encapsulate Tupac with his more festive. It's not really much like a summer vibe, which Tupac is a pretty good artist to make like summer and those kind of vibes towards it. So it's just something to understand. If you're expecting to like uncork a beer and smoke a blunt, something like that, and chill with your homies, bop with the girls, it's just not for that really at all. There's no real songs from All Eyes on Me on here. It just has like a particular kind of, I'm talking like I'm going to give this album a bad score, but it's just to kind of say that the particular themes of this, there are more songs from like Tupac's old days before 1995, more so than vibes from like when he broke out throughout the Thug Life, Me Against the World, and All Eyes on Me, and even Don Illuminati days. There's no songs from the 7 Day Theory on here. And I feel like some of these moments, I'll go ahead and list some of the bad moments. Like, I really could not get into the beat of Holler If You Hear Me at all. That seemed like it was just a ripped right from a Public Enemy song, and I think it was. Really didn't like Holler If You Hear Me. Really didn't like Panther Power. That was a pretty terrible beat. It's very difficult to like a lot of 90s and 80s rap albums from before The Chronic came out. Rebel of the Underground had an okay beat, but it just was not quite catchy enough. Just felt way too old school. And then I talked about why I didn't like The Realest Kills. It just was not suited. I mean, 50 Cent didn't do that well on that song either. It just didn't seem like a very good match for 50 Cent either. I mean, you would think that Tupac and 50 Cent, both of which are folks that have gone multi-platinum, would be on a better song that could showcase them. I mean, Eminem nailed his song, but I was kind of expecting like a 50 Cent song to kind of be like some real kind of hit 'em up type shit, because that's the sort of stuff that I would think that 50 Cent would kind of do and that type of stuff, especially with his beef with Ja Rule. But that's just kind of the concept there. And but to talk about some of the enjoyable moments, like I already talked about how I felt about the Eminem produced songs. I definitely felt like all the Eminem produced songs, Ghosts, One Day at a Time, and Dying to Live were great. But I also feel like staring through my rear view. I reviewed this back on Better Days, or no, the gang-related soundtrack. I mean, this is a pretty good sample of a Phil Collins song. I mean, Tupac did it well. It's just kind of like a fuck the world kind of vibe from like a car standpoint, where if you're in your car and you're kind of feeling endangered, and it's not like every single song just has to be at the house or some other spot. I mean, this is actually when you're driving around and you're just like fuck everything kind of vibe. And that I appreciate that. I wish more musicians would kind of do that. I like Same Song with Digital Underground, which is basically Tupac's debut song where he was on an official release. I mean, it's kind of dated, but I like the Same Song. The hook on there was pretty good. I mean, it really sounds like something Busta Rhymes or Missy Elliott would do, but I did appreciate that vibe from it. Straight Ballin' was a great beat. That's definitely that's definitely a standout from Thug Life Volume 1. Just a real mellow, and I like how he says, "I'm up before the sunrise trying to get it." I mean, it's one of the first lines he says. That's pretty dope. And Bury Me a G is very haunting also. I mean, Thug Life Volume 1 was pretty dope. I definitely think that's an underrated Tupac project. And Secrets of War, it was kind of disappointing that the Outlaws were kind of underused on this project too. And Still I Rise was kind of under talked about because that was a pretty solid project. I mean, that has some bubblers on there. Still I Rise, the Outlaws and Tupac albums, kind of a combination. It's both of their albums, and a lot of that was stuff that they did like in 1996. So Secrets of War is a pretty good song. There's definitely more gems that should have been on there, but this is an overall scant project. That's the whole thing about it. It was just overall really scant. And I don't know why they made it so compact. I know that they were really trying to promote the documentary and the movie more so than the soundtrack, but I'm glad that Eminem at least halfway came through. I don't want to say halfway like he was, being half-assed, but just to kind of say he gave this record 3 beats, he threw 50 Cent in, he dropped a verse himself, and he even got the Outlaws along for the ride. And plus, the concoction of some of this just really worked well together. I mean, there's a lot of good Tupac songs. I just feel like it's kind of singular, just more showcasing Tupac's kind of paranoid and haunting kind of vibes. When, I don't know, I don't want to complain about it like I have a problem with the thematic about it, but it just feels like, I don't know. I feel like this project probably could have been an album on its own more so than just having like a bunch of songs that he had already done in his lifetime. If it had been a bunch of Eminem and 50 Cent produced songs like Loyal to the Game was, that would have been outstanding. But it's just a taste. That's the thing. It's just mainly just like an EP's worth of new Tupac and unreleased Tupac type stuff. And it works well minus the Red Spider song. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, for the most part, there's the only real reason to pick this project up. You might as well just get the Tupac albums that already have this music anyways, because for the most part, the Tupac albums that have these songs are better. But I do feel like Ghost, One Day at a Time, and Run and Dying to Live are at least 3 good reasons to pick up this album. All 3 of these Eminem beats are outstanding, and they really kind of showcase like the possible, even though it was just in passing glance, it's still the Eminem Tupac collaborations were pretty menacing, and I definitely like the concept of Eminem as a producer on top of that. So that's about the only real reason to purchase this. But so I'll go ahead and list the 9 songs out of 13 I enjoyed, so you know. So Straight Ballin', Bury Me a G, Secrets of War, Runnin' Dying to Live, Death Around the Corner, Ghost, One Day at a Time, Same Song, and Staring Through My Rear View. Now, I mean, like I said, for the most part, the only real reason to pick up this project is for the Eminem songs, unless like you truly just would prefer to not get the Tupac albums that they're associated with. But Tupac is such an outstanding artist, you might as well. So it's kind of like a movie soundtrack, where essentially when they don't put exclusives on there, it kind of defeats the purpose of picking up the movie soundtrack, just because there's no real point to getting it. So these Eminem songs are basically the main reason. If 50 Cent and Tupac had fit the Red Spider beat better, and it had been a better beat that was more suiting of those 2 artists, that probably would have worked out well. But I felt like 50 Cent was kind of underused, and it just kind of felt underdeveloped in the sense of trying to get that done. But it was an attempt, but it was kind of a brick. So that's just kind of the situation there. So me liking 9 out of 13, despite the fact Me liking 9 out of 13, despite the fact that I only really like 3 out of 4 of the new songs. I'm going to go ahead and give this album, I mean, I would say 9 out of 13 would be about an 8.5 out of 10, but I'm just going to give this album a 7 out of 10 just because I like the 3 new songs and all the Tupac songs that were on there. But like I said, there's really no reason to pick this up if you're not interested in the Eminem songs. That's kind of the situation. It's just trying to say, like, you might as well just get the rest of these projects. Now, I do think at least the Digital Underground, that EP, the Digital Underground EP is a little bit difficult to obtain, and it's the same thing with like the Lost tapes with Panther Power, but that's not really that good a song. So minus those 2 EPs, I mean, it's a little. Some of these are a little bit tricky. The gang-related soundtrack's a little bit tricky to get to. But for the most part, there's just not enough of the material that's tricky to get that's really worthwhile. So I feel like this could have been outstanding if there had been a few more original beats on here. You know, maybe a 50 Cent song that could have showcased their chemistry a lot better, and maybe even a couple more Eminem beats and maybe some more hits with the Outlaws on there. But I mean, it's good, but not outstanding. That's kind of how I feel for it. I mean, I feel like it had the attempts well put together, and the singles were definitely good, and the Eminem beats were definitely good, but that's, you know, it's very kind of shortened. It's just like a bite-sized amount of what it should be. So the social score, though, I will give, you know, about a 7 also, just because it did have 2 singles and they charted pretty well. But yeah, it's just that it feels like the mood of Tupac was just not quite as festive as it needed to be. Both of the singles from Tupac were really dark and kind of brooding, and it's kind of similar to how Eminem used to be sometimes, where he just was not, he felt kind of paranoid and kind of janky almost, and it's like, hey, loosen up a bit. I mean, Tupac at least did it, but this is not a very loosened up project. So it's kind of, so it's a 7. It's social, it's dark, it's brooding, but if you're not in the mood to be paranoid and that type of stuff, and if you don't think that death is around the corner, it kind of loses some of its appeal somewhat. So that's kind of the situation. But yeah, so the future, like, Tupac has not dropped an album or a posthumous album since 2006 with Pac's Life, but I wanted to start covering a few more of these and that type stuff. So that's what it is there. But yeah, this is good, but just understand some of the flaws that come along with it.